You're listening to Tapasya Loading, a boutique podcast for the holistic creative. And I'm going to be doing a solo cast for you folks today. This episode is brought to you by the Holistic Musician Academy and safeandsound.studio. Mentoring for serious creatives looking for deep support. For musicians and artists, I have a free course for you. 6 days, 1 map, real change. Please go to holisticmusicianacademy.com and click on free training. For vocation agnostic coaching and facilitation inquiries, please go to safeandsound.studio. I'm TL Mazumdar, pianist, songwriter, educator. Let's stoke the fire. I've had a hell of a week. Contracts revolving, probably one of the most demanding releases of an album in all senses of the word that I'm working on. The album itself, the music, the production, the collaboration of it all. A lot of new clients I've been working on in my coaching practice, working on new articles, recording a guest episode earlier this week, but last night actually, which was absolutely awesome, by the way. Thank you for everyone who came by. A lot of music, a lot of listening, a lot of learning. I'm studying 2 courses on neuroscience and neuropsychology and taking an additional advanced music theory course, all while working on my piano practice and ordering a new piano, by the way, and crushing on a girl at my local Späti as well. For you non-Berliners, a Späti is basically one of those kiosks you find pretty much all over the world, except in Berlin. It's a place to hang out as well. The reason I mention this is because it's late. It's almost 2 a.m, and I'm absolutely running late to record my solo cast this week, and I almost didn't. So I found myself in one of those positions where I found myself, that's 2 times I say found in the same sentence. I found myself, that's 3 now, well anyways, wondering, what do I do on a week like this? Do I stick to my schedule because it's something I'm supposed to do as a practicing musician, artist who wants to keep a here it comes content schedule, even though someone's got to find a better word for content really soon. I shudder to think of my content as content. Art, but I can't really call all of it art, can I? Oh, okay, rabbit hole there. But yeah, I really found myself wondering, that's 4 or 5 times I said found in a span of 1 minute? Freudian slip. What am I looking for? What is it that I want to find? Wow, yes, rambling indeed. Okay, in fact, speaking of rambling, a recent conversation I had with a random online call. I do a few of those in some of the communities I work in, online ones. Talked about how podcasts are all about rambling. I remember feeling rather insulted, thinking I try not to. I think I might have actually retorted with that exact sentence. I try not to, and I really do. But yeah, the thing is, I don't know. I feel like we all could do with a bit of a ramble. I think a lot of the material I cover on my solo casts can get pretty heavy. A lot of it is a mix of my writing and my speaking. My recordings will influence the writing, and the writing will influence the recording. So it's pretty dense stuff. It's not for the faint of heart anyway. So a bit of a ramble every now and then. I don't know. Did it hurt anyone? Let me know. I'd be happy to hear. So anyways, I couldn't manage to finish my writing, my article writing, not songwriting, just to be clear, for this week's solo cast. So I thought I'd look back on some of the archives from my stuff on the blog, which I haven't recorded yet. And I ended up coming up with something which I feel is quite pertinent. As a matter of fact, that quote-unquote ramble I just started off with is related to this, because before I decided on this article, decided on actually filling you in live with no scripts whatsoever on why my week was the way it was, I found myself, a part of myself asking, will people like that? And the minute I thought of it, I knew exactly that this article that I wrote a couple of years back is absolutely still as relevant as it feels tonight. It's called The Perils of Like Culture. Now, I feel like with all the hullabaloo going on with AI of late, the biggest fear in the room at the moment isn't like culture anymore the way it was. About a couple of years back, or even last year, the algorithm was the biggest enemy, and quote-unquote enemy, just to be clear. And now AI seems to have replaced that theme. So a part of me again wonders if some of you will find this as pertinent from a buzzword kind of perspective, because quote-unquote like culture may not come across as the biggest elephant in the room in the moment, but I would contend it's the root cause of all the madness we find ourselves stuck in the midst of. So, I'm going to discuss something I wrote a couple of years back, which was inspired deeply by partly my frustration at the kind of things I was being told I ought to be doing to grow my social media following, something I've always had super reservations about. In case you've ever wondered why my social media following is so lean compared to the prolific manner in which I put content out, it's because I'm super selective about the people I actually allow to follow me. I regularly remove followers from my account because I'm not extraordinarily comfortable with the fact of being followed by people I'm not sure I would want to hang out with. It's an open question. I still haven't really made a call on this. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's part of the protocol in this day and age to quote-unquote grow your social media following, which I just cannot bring myself to do. So much for that. And again, at the root cause of it all, no, underneath it all, the root cause of it is my skepticism to dislike for the whole like culture. And I'm going to expand upon exactly that tonight. I'm looking at my writing now, and I love how I kind of address the entire situation right on the first line, which goes, in the not so distant past, musicians were known for bravery. There, that kind of nails it all. I mean, I could actually end this whole solo cast right now, because how many musicians do you know for true bravery anymore in this day and age? True bravery, the one which doesn't act upon a strategy to come across as brave, but are actually brave. Back in the day, that's what you counted on artists for, being brave. We were supposed to be fearless and uncompromising in our vision. And art was an extension of our, I know this sounds dramatic, but soul. Not a product designed to be made palatable to the masses. Now that word product is a big one for me because I actually do work on product not placements, but developing products. And I'm a music producer as well. So, it's interesting. One of the paradoxes in the music industry is how music producers, a very respected position, hip thing to be, hip dude to be, or hip person to be, pardon me, whereas the actual idea of a product being launched in the music industry still comes with a lot of discrimination. So I think the root of that is the fact that a product comes with the connotation of being something that's meant to be liked inherently. And that's where things got a little murky in the arts industry. Because art is not made to be palatable to the masses, to find a gap in the market, to figure out how to sell. But a lot of the industries tried to do that. I think that's the biggest gap between artists and industry professionals. I could go off on one just on that, about how the exchange between artists and industry specialists has never been a balanced one. It's always us, the artists, who keep getting these lectures from these quote-unquote experts on how we ought to be marketing our work, instead of actually learning that, hey, maybe you should learn a little more about what we do in the first place. A lot of professionals will claim to understand it, but they don't, because at the end of the day, at some point, what they eventually try to coax us into doing can be anyway, pretty generic business strategies. So anyway, long story short, we artists, I'm not just referring to musicians and painters and stuff. Anyone who identifies as a true artist, as a vision, and that's something I define as someone who puts the dharma first, the vision first, their love for making what they make first, without thinking about if anyone's going to like it. If any of those folks created just to be liked, the world would be a really shitty place to live in. Because we create to express and challenge people's perceptions, and sometimes even provoke discomfort. You know, if you think about iconic historical musicians like Bob Dylan and his defiance of genre conventions or the political protests he did, or that's easy to kind of identify as challenging if politics is a thing. But if we look at more subtle attempts to do exactly the same, like Miles Davis's constant reinvention of his music, of art, Joni Mitchell's super subtle way of talking about heartbreak, but from an incredibly adult point of view, where it's not just some syrupy boy meets girl meets boy and then things don't work out, but like so much more nuance to what actually goes on, that points to so many things of the human condition per se. If you look at these artists, obviously I ended up quoting my regular favorites here. These were folks who weren't pandering for approval. They were pushing boundaries, regardless of whether the world was ready to catch up and listen to them. And for anyone who hasn't noticed, the landscape of art history, at least in the mainstream, has shifted drastically since. There are generations out there to whom, to start off with, some of these names may not even mean anything anymore. Well, that's kind of a rite of passage. That's a whole different theme of its own. But the pressure to be liked has become an omnipresent force now. And the way it shapes the decisions of so many artists is unprecedented, I'd like to contend through my observations. And social media, there we go again, where the currency of success is often quantified in likes. I mean, that's where this whole shit show started from. I blame Facebook, and pretty much everyone will, if they trace the history of it all back to where it did have its route. It's shares, followers. It is incredible how, what the number of followers on someone's account has ended up being standing for. That came out wrong, but hopefully you get the gist of it. It is literally currency now. And that is not a reliable lens to navigate what we do here, art. It's completely transformed the creative process, the creative industry, the arts industry into what is essentially a quasi-narcissistic endeavor. There I did it. I used the word narcissistic, which is something I have very strong reservations about, and tonight I will use it. Because this is not a casual observation. It's a reflection of a profound shift in the way artists have started to perceive themselves, ourselves, and our work. And I say this as someone who at this point can proudly or jadedly on some days, but usually proudly say that I've lost the thread now. Where did my sentence start? Well, anyway, I've been doing this for 30 years full time now. And so I think my observation stands for something. To understand this shift, it might help to have a look at the history of social media in the first place. The advent of the like button, which, and as promised, I'm going to trace the goddamn history now. That like button was introduced indeed by Facebook in 2009. It was initially conceived as a way to simplify interactions on their platform. So instead of writing a comment, users could simply like a post to show their approval. And what seemed like a harmless feature at the time pretty soon evolved into a powerful psychological tool. You see, the human brain, which is wired to seek social approval as a survival mechanism, began to equate likes with validation, and at some point, at the deeper level, even survival. If you think about what an artist feels like they might actually need to survive in this day and age, including the likes. And this digital feedback loop ended up influencing mass behavior in ways that were previously, unimaginable, really. You couldn't imagine it back in the day. For artists, the implications were enormous. Social media became not just a platform for sharing, for promotion, but a barometer of success, like a literal gauge. And as likes and shares became synonymous with popularity, they also started to dictate the kinds of content that artists started to create. Songs ended up being crafted to be Instagrammable, music videos tailored to go viral on TikTok. Heck, even the video formats changed now. It's vertical. And while certain countries like India, for example, even banned TikTok, both Instagram and YouTube followed suit by coming up with their versions of similar formats. Think about that. That format was actually started off by one channel. Think about that. And it took off so well that entire companies started to mimic them. Yeah, think about it. And before we knew it, needed a drink there. I just came out of the sauna earlier on. It's cold as fuck in winter, by the way. We literally going through autumn and summer this summer. But anyway, before we knew it, this entire environment redirected the artist's mindset. Not just subtly, but inexorably, to shift drastically from creating art to creating content. And that's a critical distinction that has, again, profound implications for mental health. Now that word, profound, it's gotten hijacked by AI recently, but it really is profound. So what exactly is the mental health toll here? I feel responsible to talk about this a little because I think the irony of art, which is inherently medicine if you really do the research, ending up backfiring the way it is something that needs to be talked about. There's this pressure to constantly generate content. It's ebbing a little as musicians get a little more privy to the machinery of it all, but there's still ongoing pressure. It's part of your job now to constantly generate content that garners likes. And for that to not lead to a quasi-narcissistic mindset is a lot to ask from a human. Now, this isn't to say that all artists have become narcissists, a term that generally gets overused by the underqualified, by the way, as I've probably said before, but rather that the constant need for external validation at a professional level, it's not even personal anymore, can create the kind of focus on self-image that is beyond unhealthy at this point. And that, the stats are out there. You don't have to take my word for it. Feel free to fact check me on that. The pursuit of likes is an endless chase, especially with constantly changing algorithms, which kind of, manipulates the entire manner in which how your likes are even garnered. And that line between genuine self-expression and like a performative identity blurs before most of us even realize it. What this leads to over time can't help but lead to feelings of inadequacy. And eventually, if left unattended, possibly anxiety, depression. Things that have been part of the artist's journey anyway, but now they're getting exacerbated at a whole new level altogether. As the artist's self-worth becomes increasingly tied to really banal stuff like how many people are clicking on a certain video, how many views, how many have the motivation, intrinsic or otherwise, to actually press on a heart, while the relevance of the actual art seems to diminish every day, or one would think anyway, on some days. I should mention again, since I've used this word a couple of times now, narcissism, a term that is often thrown around loosely, deserves careful consideration here. True narcissism is a clinical condition, by the way, just FYI, characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance and a deep need for admiration, often at the expense of empathy for others. However, in the context of social media, many artists develop what could be described as narcissistic tendencies, a preoccupation with how they are perceived by others, driven by algorithms, and how the behavior is rewarded, etc., etc. This isn't necessarily an artist or a creator's fault. It is, okay, I guess that's debatable, but what it started off as anyways was a byproduct of a system designed to prioritize engagement instead of art or well-being for that matter. And now there's an added danger, the people-pleasing thing. Beyond the dangers of the whole narcissism mindset or the narcissistic tendency in the first place, the pressure to accumulate likes on social media can also lead to pervasive people-pleasing syndrome amongst creators. This is real, folks. This is so real. This syndrome manifests when musicians, in their quest for validation, not just musicians, artists or creators of any kind, I keep thinking of myself here. In our quest for validation, we begin prioritizing the expectations and the preferences of our audience over our own artistic instincts. So now, instead of creating art that reflects our true vision, we end up tailoring our work to align with popular trends set by some algorithm, or worse still, some tech guru. And often, and this is the thing now, are forced to avoid what we feel might be controversial topics even though we might have something we really, really want to share about it, all in an effort to maintain what is essentially an online, or not even online, because there's no offline anyway, not really, as in our professional circles, our persona, our professional persona. The risks of falling into this people-pleasing trap is significant. I've already said it. This is a real thing. Because when we start focusing more on what we think our audience wants, rather than what they, or what we genuinely want to express, our work can become diluted and lose its authenticity. There's that word again, but it's real in this case. So not only are we stifling the inherent creative process, but also possibly enabling a vicious cycle where the artist's self-worth, the creator's self-worth, becomes increasingly dependent on external validation. And the kind of dissatisfaction that can lead to over time, at a deeper level, can't help but contribute to some form of mental health struggle eventually. It does end up there 9 times out of 10. Don't quote me on that. In this day and age, I wouldn't want to be quoted on that, but let's just say that I'm speaking from experience, both personal and from observation from colleagues, clients, and I see no shame in it. This needs to be talked about. Hopefully, I've provided enough context to make it clear why it's not just okay, but necessary to talk about this. So in essence, people-pleasing, this new form of people-pleasing, is basically eroding the very core of artistic integrity. Instead of pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo, hallmarks of truly impactful art, we find ourselves producing safe, unremarkable work that lacks depth, lacks resonance, and doesn't always necessarily come from genuine self-expression. So that people-pleasing thing ends up being an added symptom, for lack of a better term, in the equation of how social media and online, whatever, with its constant demand for approval, eventually ends up undermining a creator's mindset, an artist's mindset, and obviously overall well-being as a byproduct as well. If we contrast that to the bravery of the past, artists in the past who were far less concerned with being liked, a little more focused on their craft instead. Okay, the music industry was never without its pressures. If I speak for my own personal industry, record labels have long dictated trends and demanded hits, but there was still a sense of artistic integrity that held sway. People like Joni Mitchell or David Bowie or Prince, and mind you, while I have incredible respect for people like Prince and David Bowie, I'm not even a huge fan, but the kind of music they made was so true to themselves that I cannot help but admire what exactly was going on there. They were doing it, they were expressing themselves within the framework, despite the framework of the music industry, which was built to kind of exploit the passions of an artist for the profit of a third party. But despite all of that, they were doing it, even if it meant alienating some listeners. You know why? Because they weren't chasing likes. They were chasing their own evolving visions without the fear of it costing them commercial success, without the fear of them costing their audiences. If anything, they enjoyed provoking their audiences. Cancel culture didn't really exist the way it does today, not in a way where it can literally not just destroy but wipe out an artist's career. It happens. So this is a good time to acknowledge that the music industry of the past was not without its flaws either, and was far from anything perfect. Artists were often at the mercy of record labels or bigger players, corporations. government grants even. Well, that's probably still a thing, but just keeps getting more and more complex, because the minute you're dealing with fellowships and scholarships and grants, you can't help but be one step away from the political dynamic that is intrinsically related as well. All of which could dictate the direction of an artist's career in exchange for support, financial, infrastructural, or otherwise. The difference, however, in the past, and this is the biggie, in case this was too much to process, although I highly recommend you please try and process. This is important. Rewind if you have to for processing. The major difference between then and now was this. The feedback loop was way slower and less direct. An artist will always face criticism or praise, but it wasn't delivered in the instant way that the internet provides today. And a lot of feedback back in the day was from quote-unquote qualified sources, journalists, A&R, and genuine fans who were really passionate enough to invest money. Another biggie. The fans involved were people who were investing money into the artists they supported by actually buying their products, be it music, be it concerts, anything else, TV placements, and so on and so forth. What this points to, is also the stifling effect of what is essentially the fear of cancel culture, which is kind of adding an entirely new layer of complexity to this already fraught environment. In an age where online communities can quickly mobilize to silence voices that do not conform to popular opinion, artists face an additional layer of pressure, in worst case scenario for being misunderstood in a lot of ways. Fear of backlash can lead to self-censorship and push us to avoid controversy at all costs. It's a thing. I have to think way harder about the things I say and do, or even the lyrics I write. Some of the songs I've been writing of late, at this new album I'm working on, I had to be really cautious to make sure that the room for interpreting it as some kind of a slogan for the wrong kind of people, who I, by the way, have absolutely nothing to do with, is not too high. That's what it's come to. Think about that. It's not the kind of thing I signed up for at all. But the result is pretty much a landscape where music starts sounding increasingly homogenized. Everybody sounds the fucking same. And the pursuit of this whole combined with the fear of cancellation, which are pretty much the two sides of the same coin, combine to create art that is sanitized, safe, and ultimately forgettable. And by the way, please don't make that a pandemic reference. That is, I did not want to hint at anything you might have thought I was hinting at, just to be clear. Oh great, now that I just made that sound even worse. But just to be clear, no pandemic references intended here, okay? Just so you know. Cancel culture in its most toxic form, though, discourages the very kind of fearless artistic pursuits that once defined art and the arts ecosystem. Now it creates an environment where creators are punished not just for their mistakes, but often their willingness to take risks and explore controversial ideas, which, by the way, isn't really an option anymore if you think about it. Or even question events. Question events they might be processing on their own terms. In some countries, it's not even legal now. Like, there are certain topics you are not allowed to have a certain public opinion on. Think about that. Now, just to be clear, this is not to say, I'm not saying that accountability should be discarded. Yeah, art is not a license to kind of just say whatever the fuck you want, or maybe some would argue it is, but that's not the camp I'm coming from. I think artists, like everyone else, will fare a lot better by trying to be responsible for our words, their words, our words, and actions. Responsibility is legit. It's a thing. It's a thing we need to get a hang for. But art in itself is inherently dependent on a certain degree of between the lines, ambiguity, which is not a very popular concept in this day and age in a lot of circles. But demanding it to adhere to popular opinion or choose sides is a very questionable practice that's being normalized increasingly as socio-political environments get increasingly volatile, divided, and socio-cultural concepts in themselves are a lot more complex than they were, say, even 20 years back. So that rush to cancel can lead to a chilling effect where a lot of artists are just too afraid to express anything that might be perceived as controversial. So how can the modern artist navigate this whole new landscape without falling into the dreaded trap of, narcissistic tendencies or being paralyzed by the fear of cancellation, the two extremes? I have an answer which I find very confident. I feel very confident in putting on the record. I think the key lies in intentionality. The why. I've come to a point where some people have actually started calling me the why guy. For those of you, my clients and coaches who've been working with me long term are probably going to laugh when they hear me say this again. But yeah, what's your why? What's the why behind whatever it is you're putting out there? Really? I mean, that's always been a timeless compass, but now in this day and age, the relevance it takes on is just a whole new dimension. Social media, for all its flaws, can be a powerful tool for connection and expression. It allows us to reach audiences that would have been unimaginable in the pre-digital era. However, it's crucial to use these platforms as a means to an end and not as an end in themselves. We need to strive to maintain a balance between engaging with our audiences and also staying true to our actual artistic vision. This might mean setting boundaries on social media use, focusing on the quality of interactions rather than the quantity of likes, and most importantly, remembering why we started making art in the first place, whatever your art is. I would say that it's also essential to actually cultivate relationships, offline or online, like really nurture them, keep an eye out on the people who seem to bring a certain quality in the way they engage and respond to whatever it is you put out there. Don't treat them the same way as some random, hater or bot, which will be a part of the deal as well. And make sure you're growing the skills to distinguish between these two parties and respond accordingly as well. Someone who, says something remotely positive, actually is making an effort to show you support. And sometimes we artists don't necessarily realize that. That's a skill I recommend developing. See if you can't find something to be grateful for in the people who are responding to your work, online or offline. No matter what the size of that gesture might feel like. It's that's how you build your audience. It's not a social media campaign. It's not ads. That's what actually provides the real grounded sense of validation than some fleeting approval, be it online, on social media, or otherwise. We're basically talking about fostering environments, growing environments. I want to be careful with that word foster. That's another AI hijack, by the way. No, but foster is a good word, folks. Foster your environments, really. That encourages bravery, encourages artistic pursuits that are inherently fearless. Because being brave and fearless are not always the same thing, by the way. But build the spaces you want to be in, or at least try and contribute in building the spaces you would like to find yourself in through your work. Even if the statements made by your art don't always align perfectly with all beliefs, personal or otherwise. Does that make sense? Because the way I see it, true artistry, no matter what the modality of your art is, has always thrived in the tension. If art is all about resolution, it is only one half of the story. There is no resolution without the tension. So learning to build a muscle that understands the distinction between the two, the necessity of each, without it blowing up in ways that is out of context or unnecessary and has nothing to do with the art at some point, that muscle is probably one of the most important things we can build on in this day and age. Allowing space, it's the kind of thing which eventually allows us as artists the space we need to experiment, to fail, and to even occasionally misstep without rushing to silence the entire dynamic of it all. Silence us or silence audiences. And to audiences, I'd say that knee-jerk urge you might have to silence someone's point of view, artist or otherwise, consider examining it. Take a minute to pause and ask if you're really sure about what you think they're saying and what they're actually saying are the same thing. Silencing someone or shaming them or hating on them or even canceling them doesn't necessarily equate to the opposite of endorsing harmful behavior by default. That was a complicated sentence, but think about that one. There's a lot of nuance involved in it. So I guess the conclusion to all I just talked about, wow, this turned out to be way longer than I thought. I was tired. Now I'm full of energy and it's like 2:30 in the morning. But anyway, so needless to say, this whole social media game, the internet generally has revolutionized the arts industry, the artistic practice as a definition in itself. And sure, there are unprecedented opportunities that we have access to in this day and age for exposure, but also connection. But this pervasive like culture, going back to the root of what we're talking about tonight, that's a threat. That's a threat. As is cancel culture, again, to reiterate, two sides of the same coin. Both of them, this dynamic duo is a major threat that have introduced a whole new level of pressure that can distort an artistic mindset in ways that is simply absolutely unnecessary and just really harmful, not just for art, not just for the artist, but the entire world at this point. Because there is, I'll say the cheesy thing, the word earth without art is just A. So yeah, for the whole world. To navigate holistically, I founded the Holistic Musician Academy, so I will keep pointing to that word holistically, navigating holistically between both poles. Musicians, artists, creators, remaining intentional in our message, the intentionality, prioritizing the authenticity of it all, over approval, embracing the fearless artistic spirit, which is the true driving force behind creativity. These shouldn't be optionals. They should be essential. I said should twice in the same sentence. I promised myself I won't say should. How do I rephrase that? But let's just say prioritizing the actual creative spirit over the consequences it might have without shunning responsibility or accountability, and being intentional about the entire thing from front to back. That would be my take on this. I'd contend it's the best chance we have at reclaiming our voice, our artistic practice, our artistry from the grip of external validation as the driving force behind it, as the manipulative or dominating voice behind the entire dynamic. So, and also it's our best chance at actually, again, fostering, growing these environments where loving but also bold, uncompromising expression thrives once more again. And I'd like to think that's where we're headed. That's my take on it. All right, that was me out for tonight. I hope that helped. Remember just a few things. If you're still listening, thank you. I went off on one there. So how long have I been recording? Let me just check. Oh, well, 44 minutes. And mostly unscripted. A lot of it anyways. Well, for a guy who wasn't sure he even wanted to record a solo cast tonight, maybe I'm a little proud of myself, just a little. And if you've still stuck around, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll be hosting a few more live events going forward. FYI, there's a new one-on-one intensive coaching spot, by the way, of very limited slots. I'll be working with only 4 people on this, completely one-on-one. This is basically the best of all my coaching modalities into one 3-month program where I work one-on-one with the student or client to get them from where they're stuck at to exactly where they want to be with a system that they can use sustainably. There are a lot of live events coming up as well, both in person for those of you in Berlin or nearabouts. I'll be hanging out in Berlin for most of this year, but online as well for my non-Berlin folks out in the States and the UK and in Asia. Please stay posted. Some of these will be complimentary. Most of these will be complimentary. I'm actually doing a lot of research right now. Some of these will be paid depending on what the needs of the audiences will be. And folks, the album is about to drop. I can't tell you how tough it's been for me to not share details on this, but hopefully it'll be worth the wait. Just a few more weeks now. So lots going on the back end. Take good care of yourself. Spread the word and reach out via email or DMs. Email, if you're on my mailing list, please know. And anyone who's on my list, which is 10 years old now, will confirm that I reply to every mail. I might not do it instantly, but I reply to every single email I get personally to the best of my ability. So that's me. Over and out. Much love. Take care. And I'll see you soon. Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.